Good evening. This is the meeting of the Select Board Committee on Policing Reform. Or is it Reforms, Michael Zorob? I'm not clear.
It has an S, Reforms.
Okay. So this is a meeting for January 13, 2021. I'd like to, we're going to start off with approving the minutes, but I just want to mention that because of the events that happened in DC last week, I think committee members want to make some comments for the record and hopefully that are relevant to the work of this committee. But first, let's approve the minutes of December 30, 2020. Do we have other minutes, Ms. Fields?
Yes, December 16th and December 30th were included in this packet for review.
Okay. Yeah, I've looked at both of them. Any comments or edits from the committee?
Bernard, I just have one on both. Well, just one comment, period, which is that I think it's the most recent meeting. There was something that made reference to page 174 of the packet. The Accountability Subcommittee request endorsement of recommendations on page 174 of the packet.
Yeah.
Could after the meeting sometime tonight, could somebody put in a sentence what that is? I didn't bother looking at it, but I think the minutes become kind of mysterious without describing the topic. I don't even remember what it was. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. Devin, do you understand what he's saying?
I do. So that was when folks were going over the feedback form.
Okay.
And I guess this is twofold. I'm happy to include what that item was, but when you use OnBase, you'll see if you go to that meeting, the agenda, the packet, and the minutes. So someone could easily toggle over, but I'm happy to just in parentheses say, recommendations from the feedback form, the police feedback form.
Yeah, I think that would accomplish what I'm talking about. I knew I could find it if I took the time, but I didn't have time, and I just think it would make it clearer. That's all.
Okay.
Just adding those few words would be great.
Okay. So with those edits, can I get approval for the minutes for both December 16, 2020 and December 30, 2020? All in favor, please raise your hands.
Raise your hand physically or raise your hand.
Well, let's do it physically. Just make it easy, okay? Any opposed? Okay, any abstain? Bob, I think you need to abstain for.
I abstained from
16.
the December 12th or
16. Right. Okay, good.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bernard, I need to abstain from the last meeting because I was not present at our meeting 2 weeks ago.
Okay, that's right. You get that, Devin?
Yes,
Devin?
I did.
Thank you.
Well, last Wednesday was quite what Thomas Jefferson would call little rebellion. Of course, let me just say that we rejected Jefferson's little rebellion idea with the 14th Amendment, as I think we now know, given the discussion on Capitol Hill. I think committee members want to make some comments, hopefully as they relate to how this insurrection that happened is relevant to this committee, and I think it's relevant in many ways. I have a statement, but in the interest of time, I'm going to just submit that statement to Devin to be included in the record of this committee. And if other people would like to do it that way, they're welcome to. Otherwise, if anyone has a desire to make a comment, hopefully not long, on the events in DC and their relevance to this committee, I'd like to hear. You can hear now. I'd like to hear now. Mr. Mandy, did you want to make a comment? No? Okay.
So, sure, I do have a comment I would like to make, but that is not a specific comment I requested time for. However,
okay, I'm sorry, misunderstood.
Yeah, I'm saddened to inform everybody that I will be stepping down from my participation in this committee and the subcommittee, the accountability subcommittee. Today will be my last day. My father's health is continuing to pose challenges. This would be the third time since he was first hospitalized with COVID-19 in May that he's hospitalized as of Monday evening. So he's going to continue to, as his medical proxy, require my support. Therefore, it is wise and very difficult, however, for me to step down from my participation. With that said, I believe, just in light of, leaving and the work that I've been a part of in the subcommittee level, I feel that it is imperative that we implement some sort of citizen review board to work in conjunction with the select board in order for them to, with subpoena power, to really have some checks and balances to ensure that we are really instilling something in place for longevity, and this is our opportunity to do the right thing, I believe here, to really ensure a future of transparency, honesty, and justice, in our complaints process. In addition to that, what I would have to say about the insurrectionist movement that happened last week on Wednesday is that, as we've seen in the pictures in recent history, if it were Black and brown people, there would have been bodies on the floor. What happened, as we all know, that it was a majority white mob with impunity, and they completely sacked the Capitol. We know that mentality, that sort of tribalistic mindset does not belong in our nation, and let alone in our system of justice. With all of that, the police were being incredibly gentle, and they were giving them space. In contrast with what we saw with the Black Lives Matter movement, it was just a completely different scene where the police showed up in droves ready to go to war. But in this case, they were there to help and support, and make room and create room for a movement that came ready to kill and hang our vice president. And the police officers across the country that were involved in that movement, are definitely going to be facing accountability, and it is important for us as we continue this work here in Brookline and of course across the country, that we think about what kind of systems are we going to put in place to ensure accountability overall in towns like Brookline and across the country. That's all I had to say. Thank you all for your work, and I look forward to seeing the end of it all.
Okay. I'm really sorry about your father's situation. I think, as everyone knows, your father and your mother came to America from a very, very difficult situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And despite the horrendous conditions that they had to struggle with getting out of the Congo, as well as the difficult situation they faced when they came to America, your entire family has really been a great asset to Brookline, as well as wider community. So I hope you know that Brookline appreciates the fact that this immigrant family has done what many immigrant families have done, and that is really improved and enhanced the lives of all of us in America. So sorry that you have to leave, but know that we appreciate what you and your family has done for the community.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Okay. Unless anyone else has any comments regarding this, I'd like to just mention one thing that I noticed when I did some research in preparing my remarks for the select board last night was that police officers in Massachusetts, and Mr. McDevitt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are only required to swear an oath to the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, not to the U.S. Constitution. Now, I find that fairly weird, but I think that's one issue that our committee should address, either through an oath that would be taken pursuant to bylaw or the policies and procedures of the police department, or suggesting that state law be changed so that it's clear that police not only swear an oath to the state constitution, but to the U.S. Constitution. Now, maybe that's implied, but I think it should be explicit. So that's a task for us to take up. So tonight, as part of our educational program, pre-meeting educational program, although I think it may take up the entire meeting, and that would be great because what we're going to hear is going to be very, very important. We have Jack McDevitt, who's a member of the faculty at Northeastern University and one of the preeminent experts on policing in America, as well as, of course, more specifically here in Massachusetts. I don't know if I need to give you any more introduction than that, but
no, that was very generous.
Okay, to start off. Okay.
So I'm happy to be a resource to this committee and try to provide any information that I have. Just to give you a little bit of the background, I've done racial profiling work across the country. We did the first 2 studies in Massachusetts, which looked at all 350 agencies in Massachusetts. I've done 2 studies in Rhode Island. We also were the group to put together the first civilian oversight board for the city of Boston and put that in place. And, now I'm heading up a group that's looking at policing reforms on the Northeastern University campus, or the Northeastern University Police. And I've been working in policing and trying to work on issues of race and justice in policing for my whole career. So that's about 44 years at Northeastern. And I'm happy to respond to questions or, go to topic to topic. I know that Dan had sent me some topics that people wanted to talk about, but, however you want to proceed would be fine in terms of how you want to go through this.
Well, Dan listed 5 topics that we thought that would be very helpful for the committee to hear from you on. And I don't have my notes in front of me, so
I have them in front of me.
Okay, so and the main thing I think would be helpful is with respect to, for example, 2 of the topics, data, policing data, and bias. Training. It'd be very interesting and important for us to sort of understand, how we look at data. I mean, data is just, numbers, and numbers can be manipulated all kinds of ways, or inadvertently sort of distract us from the reality that we're trying to understand. So if you could, with respect to data analysis and the data that we're collecting in terms of police vehicle stops, field interrogations and other things, how do you look at that data? I mean, it's just numbers, but how do we make it into something that's useful?
Sure.
And useful and accurate.
Right. So to respond to that, I'm a social scientist. I deal with data all the time. I would say that we form most police departments, and Brookline's included. I would say I've worked in and around Brookline with Brookline from time to time. Brookline's a good police department. It's not one of the bad police departments. I've worked with lots of bad police departments. So Brookline is a good one to start with. Doesn't mean it couldn't be better, but it is a good department. That being said, you know, one of the things that police departments do is if they want to deal with something like racial profiling, they develop a policy. It's the first thing they do, or they revise a policy. And the second thing they do is they do training. So you could do something like fair and impartial policing training, implicit bias training, you know, procedural justice training, all of which I know that has happened in Brookline Police Department over the years. Well, the part where it breaks down, though, is to question of whether or not the training changed anyone's behavior. And that I think you can only do with data, is to look at what changed. If we did this training and we put this policy in place, what changed? I don't think that training and policies by themselves are as effective as if they're being monitored. And so, you know, and as an example, in Minneapolis, as many of you know, where George Floyd was killed, there was a policy against chokeholds. They were banned in the city. And there was a policy requiring officers to report any misconduct by other officers. And we still saw an officer kill George Floyd in the street. So I think we need to do more than simply have the policy and have the training, but we need to have the training and then measure that the training is something that has impacted officers' behavior in a positive way. I see a bunch of hands. Do you want me to call on people?
Why don't we make this an interactive type thing?
Sure, that would be great. Michael?
Hey, thanks for coming and speaking with us. I guess as one initial question I'd like to ask you about, I was wondering if you had any models, either examples from other places or anything else you've thought of for what civilian oversight of law enforcement might look like in, let's say, medium-sized communities like Brookline. I think a lot of the models that I've read about, you know, that get researched about tend to be in larger cities where they have pretty big staff, significant staff and so forth. And kind of given where we're at in terms of our size, I'm curious whether you're aware of any models for civilian oversight in such communities, or otherwise what your thoughts were in that regard.
Sure. I think that, well, let me tell you the part that leads up to what I'm about to say. So we were asked to put together a report for Boston to recommend a model for Boston. We went around the country and we looked at different places, and you're absolutely right. The places that are most well-known are bigger cities, not Brookline-sized cities, but there are lots in medium-sized cities like Brookline. The challenge is that these boards, if they were to do their own investigation, are quite expensive. You know, you have to have staff that's going to do your own investigations. So what we had recommended is that you take the problem in a community plus the scope of the, you know, complaints in a community, and you tailor something that fits within the idea, the sort of history, background, and culture of that community. And Brookline's a community that has a real culture of valuing diversity and a culture of having a community where people want their police to be excellent. And so I would say that what we've always sort of started with is, it's better if you can have the police do their own investigations and you can trust that, than to have an outside group do the investigations. The reason I say that is that's not true everywhere. The reason I say that is it's much better if the police own the punishment and investigations of misconduct in their own organization. To be able to farm it out to someone else and say, you guys take care of it, takes a certain amount of ownership and onus off of the police department. That being said, it should be the case that there's eyes outside the police department that are looking at how those investigations are done. And so that would mean that a group would have access to, and I saw one of your models that you had proposed, some of you, and that they would have access to the files, that they would be able to talk to the people involved, they'd be able to review cases. And that model, I think, is one that gives you the external eyes and oversight of the kinds of misconduct investigations that are done. At the same time, you're not trying to replicate expertise that already exists in the police department in terms of doing the aid. But we could talk more about it. But
Yeah.
that's sort of the model that I think is most places have adopted, is some kind of ability to call for cases, to look at cases, to have a separate set of eyes on the investigation and feel that investigation was done truthfully.
Mm-hmm. Can I follow up just very quickly?
Of course.
So thank you for that very helpful answer. So a lot of what we've talked about in terms of complaints, both here and I think generally when we talk about police misconduct, is like a very adversarial process. It's almost quasi-legal, quasi-judicial, like rooting out the bad actors. And I wonder, I mean, I think that's super important, obviously. But I also wonder the extent to which civilian oversight can also be about things like mediation, about identifying what we want our police department to do. Like what is the ideal behavior, not just what is the very bad behavior we need to correct. And those kinds of sort of other ways in which, civilian oversight can be a way of connecting communities with the police department and shaping the culture of those institutions. And I'm just wondering if, you have any thoughts about that type of civilian oversight or civilian liaisoning with the police department, as in addition to the adversarial part.
Yeah, I think that two things. One is that mediation is really helpful. I think it's a good model. It's one of the most common models across the country. Of course, it's for low-level allegations of misconduct, which is the most common kind of misconduct anywhere across the country, is rudeness. Officers are rude to members of the community, and that's the most common by far. For rudeness complaints, then and also what we did in Boston was we put one in for rudeness, low-level complaints for first-time offenders. So for officers who did their first complaint against them, and that it was a low-level complaint, that officer and that complainant would have to agree to do mediation. And if they did, it would not count against the officer as a strike, if you will, and they would go through a mediation process. That is in place now in Boston. It took a number of years for them to get to that place, but it is in place. It comes from a restorative justice kind of background, and it has involved people. They involve people from Harvard that have the Restorative Justice Center over there to help them with it. But it is a model that I think can really work. The other thing I saw in your policy for your board that I think is really important is that to just react from complaints is really difficult. So I think it's more important in Brookline, where you guys don't have a lot of complaints. It's more important to look at the policies and see how the policies are being acted out. And so this group would have the access to, review the policies on use of force, review the policy on, complaints being taken, whatever you think, and have that be, something that way you're doing more systemic change to the organization than just a one-offs on, okay, this complaint was mishandled or this officer wasn't punished severely enough. So that would be my thoughts on that. I think having a group that would look at policies from time to time and review them would be really helpful. And I think that has more chance for systemic change in an organization.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, it looks like, I'm sorry, it looks like, Raj, is that your finger up?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
First question, you said that the training in Minneapolis did not really change the behavior of the officers in the Floyd case. So does that raise questions about what does that training do? Are you, I'll leave it at that. And the second question is that I feel that the complaints committee that we have been talking about, citizens complaint, should have some form of, and maybe this is not the right phrase, but some form of subpoena power, so that it's not just that this committee recommends to another, even the select board, but it just recommends. I think we need to do better than that, because without that, I'm not sure it would change much beyond what it is right now.
Hey, before you answer that, one of the issues I think we have in committee is terminology. So I'd like Raj to sort of explain what he means by subpoena power. As
I said at the subcommittee meeting, what I mean is that beyond making a recommendation to the select board, there should be some ability of this committee to force the issue. What do I mean by that? That if the select board chooses, for whatever reasons, that this is just sitting around and nothing is happening, the committee should be able to say, no, we need this thing to have some teeth. We need to resolve this. It's not just recommendations. It's, can we take some action? That's perhaps, as Bernard said, my terminology on that is not what it should be. But all I'm saying is we can make recommendations till cows come home. But if nothing happens, then we all wasted our time, in my opinion.
Sure. Well, thank you, Raj, for the questions. Training, I've trained thousands of law enforcement officers around the country. You know, the best training in the world is going to hit different officers differently. Some officers are going to really like it and they're going to embrace it. Some officers are going to be, I don't exactly know what to do with this. And some officers are going to be, I do hate crime training, and some officers are going to be, you know, absolutely against it. And so training itself isn't going to change people's minds. It's training plus, you know, monitoring, and there's a variety of ways you can do that, but that changes people's minds if it's a value. What you refer to as subpoena power, there's a number of places around the country that have what you described. It's not really subpoena power. Subpoena power would give you the power to bring documents or people to the group to try to testify. And we can talk about that. But what you're saying is that not a lot, but a number of these organizations, civilian oversight organizations across the country, if the department wants to put a punishment in, they have to run that punishment before the board, and the board gets to weigh in. In most of them, the board doesn't get a final say as to what the punishment will be, but the chief can't impose the punishment until the board has weighed in on it. And the board can, you know, ask to be increased or ask to be decreased or whatever. And that's a place where you might want to think about what you would want to do, because there is a bunch of models like that where, you know, the investigation's done, they are thinking about the punishment, it has to go to the board, and the board has to weigh in on whether they think it's too much or too little, and then the chief's informed by both the board and the investigation before they make a determination.
Okay, let's see, Marty, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, on the electronic hand. Thank you. I personally welcome Jack, whom I've had the great opportunity to get advice and work with now for this is the fifth, technically since we're 2021, it's in the fifth decade that we've.
Marty, we don't have to tell people that.
All right, well, anyway, it's my fifth decade. It may be, maybe you have a different way to do the math, but, and Jack has come, this is now the third time that he's come to Brookline to help on these issues. And and we also went to the State House many years trying to get profiling data collected statewide. And that's the part of Jack's resume that Bernard didn't quite highlight. Jack's work has not just been on police, but especially on profiling data. And he did the statewide profiling data around year 2000, when unfortunately it had a sunset clause. And he and I and other groups tried to get that back in place for about 5 or 6 years recently, and we got nowhere. But anyway, so let me get to my 3 questions. And Devin, could you put up that first document on screen share? Devin's helping me with screen share because I have so many open documents in my computer that I'm basically screen share handicapped.
Okay, so by the way, Marty, is this something that's in our packet?
Everyone has gotten this before. It's an excerpt from.
Okay, good. I think it's gonna be difficult.
Oh, actually, Devin, this is the second one. It would be the first one.
And my concern is that it'd be difficult for people to sort of absorb this on the fly.
No,
But,
they're both things that everyone has gotten before.
Okay, good.
Although on the second one, which Devin put up first, I highlighted a couple of things that were not highlighted on the version you had before.
Okay. Let's go.
Okay, so what this is, and I sent these again to Jack last night. I don't know how much he's had a chance to look at them. It was kind of last minute. These are just 2 paragraphs, one each, from the 1987 report that at least one member of this committee doesn't want me to talk about, but I am anyway. And then the 2009 report reviewing and changing the citizen complaint process that was written in 1987. And I just have one question to Jack. Basically, what we put in place, as you all know, and as Jack knows, was civilian review, but at a de novo step after internal affairs. And I still call it civilian review, but it's a de novo second level civilian review. And it does have subpoena power. So my question, Jack, as you look at these 2 paragraphs, and I don't know if you've looked at them again since last night.
Yeah, I did, Marty.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the question is, do you think these are generally still the case? These are basically the paragraphs that say that a separate independent civilian review board is not viable in Brookline, not necessary, not worth the expense, and that instead we should keep improving, as we're trying to do this year, the process that we have that I call de novo civilian review. So do you think that these 2 paragraphs are generally still the way to go?
Well, that's up to you guys. That's not
Right.
up to me. I can just tell you what happens around the country and what's going on in different places. I do think that you're seeing more and more agencies trying some sorts of civilian oversight. You're seeing very few agencies who try to do a standalone, as you're saying, Marty, civilian review board, where, like in Cambridge or like in Washington, D.C., where they do their own investigations outside of the department. And the reason for that is not that you can't do them, you can, it's just a cost. They're really expensive. And so the question is that worth the cost, or is it better to be able to have it be something that you can have eyes on one way or another? And I think what was presented back in the day was some kind of a model, like most places do, where you end up with people who are external to the department, who are able to oversee the investigations and also the policies, as I said. As you all have probably heard the knock on civilian review boards, and it's true of most of them, is that police work is, by its very nature, sort of has a whole set of rules and procedures and training and everything. And so what happens to people who are on the review board, they have to wait and hear from the police what the officer should have done in that. And they eventually get co-opted to believe that the police are always right. And we don't have boards that run, we don't have very many of them that are contrary to the police on a regular basis. So that's why one of the things we've said, as we've written about this in different places, is that you really need the people that's on the board to be people who have gravitas in your community, who are not people that, you know, are gonna feel like they have any problem disagreeing with the police's recommendation or saying that a review was done improperly. We had on the first board in Boston, we had a judge and we had the dean of the Northeastern Law School. So, you know, these were people that they were familiar with how to do investigations, and they were also people that, you know, had their own gravitas. And I think that helps to prevent against people just getting co-opted from the police department. When I was in Denver watching theirs, and theirs is one of the better ones, and they have communities sit in on the hearing with the police officer. And the distressing thing from my point of view was that the few hearings I sat in on, the community always felt that the officer should get less punishment than the police department did. And that seemed like a faulty way to include them in the process. So, you know, so Marty, I don't know, you know, this is a decision for this group in your community, but I will say that fully external, fully funded boards are rare.
And you've mentioned Cambridge. My understanding of the Cambridge one is that it has not functioned the way people that demand civilian review boards want it to. I mean, it seems to me that it's been characterized as a failure.
Well, again, you know, it's a failure is in the eyes of the person that's making that determination, but they have problems with getting police officers to come and testify. And, you know, they have subpoena power and they can make the police officer come, but he still has a Fifth Amendment right and can choose not to testify. And so that messes up any kind of investigation you might do. And, you know, when they get adversarial with the department over the years, they've, you know, the department around different ways around them. So Marty, as far as I know, there are people in Cambridge that feel that it's not functioning the way they'd like.
Okay. So something you mentioned relates to my second slide or document, which Devin, if you could put that up, the one that you had earlier.
It's up, Marty.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So this is actually just, the committee has seen this, but I actually added a little flesh on some of the bones on the second part of it just yesterday for you to take a glance at, especially the circled provisions. And this is the general direction that some of us are going in terms of a new police commissioner advisory committee is the current proposed title. And I guess you did allude to having outside, I forget how you put it, outside eyes or something like that in the process. And this is an attempt to do that in basically to help complainants through the process, but also to give an independent set of civilian eyes, but not an agency that has investigatory power, but eyes to monitor the process and with the responsibility, if they wish, to disagree with the findings. So I don't know how much, you've only had a chance to glance at that, but do you think that's a general direction consistent with what you were talking about in lieu of an independent agency that does the initial investigation?
Yeah, Marty, here's the challenge. I think that having an advocate for somebody who files a complaint is a very, very good idea. I think we're doing that at Northeastern right now. We're letting people file anonymous complaints, but they're filing them with an advocate who can advocate for them so that they can stay anonymous. So we're doing that, but I also don't know that I want the advocate to be the person reviewing the file that would be trying to see whether or not the case was decided correctly. You know, the advocate should be dealing with the person who was a complainant and supporting them. And, you know, as far as I can see that there's a potential conflict if you're the advocate and you're also a part of the person that's reviewing the file to see whether or not it was all of the safeguards and investigation was done correctly. So that's a challenge there. I'm sure you could figure out ways around it.
But in general, that's a point well taken, and we'll talk about it. But in general, is this relatively along the lines what you were talking about to get some civilians involved?
Yeah, relatively, sure.
Yeah. My last question is, you've done other than your coming to get grilled by these committees, and now the third time, 87, 2009, and now. I know
okay, Mark.
You've done I did it again. You've done other work with Chief O'Leary, including the windshield study a few years ago. And I know you've talked to him and have some idea of the efforts that have been made in Brookline. So my last question is, I do believe our biggest issue that many of us are concerned about is something that is very hard to get rid of altogether: unconscious bias and profiling. And I'm not sure we'll ever get it to zero. I see it like structural unemployment. You can never get to zero unemployment, but you certainly have to keep trying to reduce it as much as possible. And I am pleased to see the number of complaints in general going down. Well, there are people that dispute why that's true, but I'm happy to see that the number of civilian complaints has gone down over the years. I guess my question is, off the top of your head, do you know anything that we have not been trying in Brookline that we should be doing? Is there anything that you can? I know we're doing training, we're trying to improve the accountability. It's mostly the accountability on profiling data that I'm eager for other suggestions. And so any global comments you have as to what you know about what Brookline has done for the last couple of decades, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Well, okay, thank you, Marty.
And Marty, could you take your screen share down?
Yeah, it's Devin that put it up for me.
There you go. Thanks, Devin.
Thank you, Devin.
Okay, so, you know, Brookline has had a long history. They've been doing, your police department has under Dan's leadership, has been collecting data on traffic stops longer than anybody else in the state, I think. But Marty's question is a good one. What else can you be doing, and how would you know if unconscious bias is going to leak in there? I think it's a question of how you look at the data when it's being collected. Unfortunately, Brookline's in a place where, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you don't collect data on all traffic stops. You just collect data on most traffic stops. So the first question Marty asked about, are people of color stop more often, is a hard question to answer unless you have all the stops. But you can go ahead and start to measure that a little bit more. We did it with an adjusted, what they call driving population estimate, which adjusts for the population around Brookline. And you can do that model as one model. I think that one of the most exciting ones that I've seen it was first tried in Miami and has now been tried around the country in different places, is if you could collect the race of the person involved in traffic accidents, that appears to mirror your driving population pretty well. So it might mean that you have to change your traffic accident form to include race and ethnicity on that form, but that would give you a baseline or benchmark that's pretty good. It matches with the windshield survey that was done a long time ago in Brookline. It is a better way to do it. The windshield survey is the best. That's the best model, but it's also the most expensive and it's difficult. But this was a way to do it sort of from a systemic point of view, where it's just the officers would just be collecting it as they're collecting their accident reports. And that would give you that benchmark to use. I think the best practices in this kind of research is multiple benchmarks. So you want to look at, stops of residents compared to residential population. You want to look at stops compared to a driving population estimate. If you had traffic accidents, stops compared to traffic accidents. And then if you saw an officer that was high on all three, then you want to start to have an intervention. And the intervention might be what we've seen in the Mass State Police and in other places around the country is that frequently the intervention is just telling the officer, here's the data, here's what other officers are stopping, here's what you're stopping, you're doing it differently, why? And that can change the behavior. Just that intervention. You don't need to punish the officer. Sometimes it's something they don't even know they're doing. It's unconscious bias that you all know about. And sometimes it's institutional. So we were working with one agency in Massachusetts, and this one officer was just stopping far more African Americans than anybody else in his agency. And they saw that and they went and talked to him. And what he did was every day he went to a housing development in town and sat out in the parking lot and ran the plates of all the cars there. And if he got a hit on a plate, he would hang around until the car left, and then he'd pull him over and arrest him for having a warrant. Well, that may or may not be good policing. I don't think it is, but I would say that is an open question. The problem, though, is he only did it to the African-American housing development. He didn't do it to the white housing development in town. Because in his unconscious bias mind, that's where the guns were, that's where the drugs were, that's where the criminals were. And so he was able to stop that behavior just by making him aware of it. But he didn't know he was, he wasn't doing it because he's racist. He was doing it because he thought it was a good technique. So we have lots of things like that looking at the data and trying to understand why you have the disparities that you do can help. The second thing is, to go back to, is that the whole issue with who do you stop is difficult and complex, and and I'll tell you, the research is really mixed on it. There's very little disagreement, though, in what they call post-stop analysis, which is after you've made the stop, you've had a brief interaction with the person at the car, you've gotten the driver's license, you've talked to the person, you go back to the cruiser to run the plate. At that point, the decisions, two decisions are there for the police officer. The decision to give a citation versus giving a warning, and the decision to search. And if those two are, if an officer is consistently giving citations to one group versus another and searching one group versus another, particularly if the searchers don't find anything, then you may have a problem there, and you need to think about how to intervene. So there are definitely lots of ways to do this, and I'm not familiar right now with how the Brookline Police Department does that analysis, but it is an analysis that allows you to sort of identify where problem areas might be.
Let's see. The only question I see is Raj.
Yes.
Okay, I see Bob Sables. Raj, go ahead, and then Bob.
Yeah. So first, two things. Marty commented on the Cambridge, the committee's Citizens Committee, or whatever the exact title is, I don't know, and that it's not doing so well. I didn't hear any data, if you will. If that's Marty's opinion, that's his opinion. But I'd like to really see and hear from someone on that committee, on that board. And the second point I want to make is the point that why are the police officers not willing to, again, to Cambridge, wanting to to be addressing or dealing with that committee or that organization. No, I don't mean organization, I mean committee. And my comment is that it's exactly at the heart of what we are talking about, which is that we need to be able to have some ability to get to the bottom of things and make some things happen. Just recommendations are not enough.
Okay.
I
Okay.
I don't know who you could talk to at Cambridge, but I'm sure you guys could figure it out.
Yeah.
And as I said to you, there are some agencies where they haven't, the board has an ability to influence the decision, but very, very few do the board have the decision-making power.
This is Devin. I just wanted to jump in quickly and make the chair aware that Elizabeth Childs has her hand raised, as does Jonathan Mandy.
Okay. It doesn't show up on my screen. I did call him Bob Sable, our newest member, so I'd like to hear from him. And then, okay, Elizabeth Childs and Jonathan Mandy. Okay. Bob, you're muted.
This follows up a little bit on what Rod said. I wonder if you could elaborate on the issue of police not being forthcoming in super serious situations where there are, allegations of, in the most extreme murder. It's easy to understand why a policeman would choose to stay silent. But are there other things besides civilian review boards which have had more success in having the police be forthcoming? And also, I wonder if the chief could comment on whether, in his years of experience, this has been an issue of police simply refusing to cooperate in these situations.
Well, I'll let the chief talk about that. I would say that if you were talking to police officers, almost any police officer will say to you that policing is a difficult job. It's a job that, allows them to use violence. It's only jobs in America where you can, and that it's hard to judge an activity without having ever done it. I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. But that's what you're asking me, what the police officers would say. And they would say that having a civilian who's never arrested someone, who's never put someone in handcuffs, who's never had someone punch them, is never going to know how I should have reacted in the situation.
No, I guess what I was more asking is, you said civilian review boards have difficulty getting this, but are there other approaches that are more successful in getting police to cooperate?
As I said, the mediation works really well. Police will come and, sometimes they won't, and then it goes to a regular investigative thing. But most police officers see it in their interest to come and talk to the person. As I said, a lot of it is rudeness. So the conversation goes like, you made me feel terrible. You swore at me. You didn't take me seriously. And the police officer can say, well, what I was dealing with was I just come from a call where someone died and I was barely worked up about that and I shouldn't have done it and I'm sorry. And, you can come to a meeting of the mind. So police do participate in those. Where it's going to end up with them getting punishment and getting dock pay and all of that, there's a reluctance to participate. I think if you had a board that police thought was fair, they might come. But this is Massachusetts, and the police are unionized, and it's one of the most contentious places to do policing in America. So I would say it's going to be slow going. Dan?
Sure, and Bob, to answer your question, in the 23 years that I was chief, I don't ever recall asking an officer to come into the internal affairs office, sit down and talk, and that has chosen not to speak. Each time they have, even on a couple of serious cases where they had legal representation, they've come in and given a statement. So we've never run into that.
And brother, I think this is relevant. We're talking about a committee or whatever you want to call it that will be handling mostly short of extreme cases like murder or choking and things like that. With respect to the extreme cases, we don't need a committee. Hopefully the prosecutor's office would be able to handle that, and they have tools to sort of make people talk or at least get the information. So I mean, I think that's another aspect of this that it may not be relevant to Brookline. I mean, people think that Brookline is just the same as Minneapolis or wherever, but clearly it isn't. But theoretically, that's really where we ought to make sure that there's willingness on the part of the county prosecutor to take serious cases seriously. At any rate, who's next? Elizabeth? Yes.
Thanks. Well, actually, my question was about the mediation, so this was a great lead-in. I wondered if there was any data on the mediation that we have from Boston yet that we could use to help understand how successful that is compared to what we're already doing. And I'm wondering about the interface, who does the mediation? And is that an outside objective mediator? And is it an opportunity for a civilian involvement? And does it require mutual consent? I would think it probably does. And I just wondered if you could just say a little bit more about how that works and what we already know from data about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen any data about it. I know that when we recommended it a long, long time ago, it took a decade for them to put it in place. It is in place now, so you probably could get data from Boston Police on it. The way I understood it was set up originally was outside. The Harvard Mediation Group was the group that they hired to do the mediations. And so it was mostly Harvard Law School students, I think, that were mediators, but they were trained, as part of the mediation group. And they did it. The initial feedback I got from the first few cases were that people felt it was really a positive experience. The community member felt heard, and the police officer felt like they could explain their situation. And, so it seemed like a model that was worth trying. But you'd have to go to Boston. I don't know what what the numbers are and sort of how that works. We're right. It had to have two, both sides had to agree or it wouldn't happen. So if the community member said, I'd want to do mediation, and the officer said, no, it didn't happen, or vice versa.
And we have some data from Brookline because we do mediation. I'm not sure that it's sufficient to draw any conclusions, but I think one of our subcommittees is looking at that data. Okay, so next is Jonathan. And Devin, if I'm missing someone with their hands up, let me know. I just don't see anyone's hands up.
Jonathan's hand is up, yes.
Okay. Oh, he wasn't using his video.
I'm sorry. I was just on the phone with my father's doctor, but we're just completing our check-in call here. So, hey, thank you, Dr. Wen. I will talk with you tomorrow.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, we shouldn't be hearing this, so.
All right. All right.
Anyone else have their hands up? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to ask this one question before I leave. I'm so sorry about that. I apologize. Well, it's not even a question. It's more an affirmation. Something Jack said. There's been a lot of sort of opposition against the Civilian Review Board, and primarily, the argument around that was coming from a perspective that it doesn't work at all across the country. That there's evidence. I haven't seen it that it's something that doesn't work at all. But it sounded like, based on what you were saying, that having like a citizen review board is really a matter of will. It's not a matter of whether or not it would work or whether or not it's a good idea. So really, that is the main thing I really wanted to affirm. And also asked. I wanted to ask you if, just based on the way the conversation has been going, do you feel that well, first of all, does a citizen review board work, and how? Maybe you can reiterate that. And also, do you feel that having some sort of, like the unconscious bias training within police departments, like what do they work? Is there evidence of their viability, in terms of sort of changing hearts? Like what does that look like?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. I'm sorry about your father. A couple things. When you say does it work, that's a from a social scientist point of view. I don't know what we would mean by work. Are they always harsher than the police department would have been? If that's the definition of work, then the answer is no, they're not. Do they increase trust between the community and the police department? If that's your definition of work, then yes, they do. They do increase trust because there are citizen voices that validate or question decisions made by the police department. So if your goal is to increase trust, if your goal is to say that the police investigating themselves is inherently wrong and they are never going to do it right, then I don't think the boards around the country have changed that very much. But they have increased trust. They've increased trust. They've increased visibility, transparency. So if that's your goal, then they do work. So it depends on how you define working and what your goals are for your board.
Right. So
yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that's kind of pretty much what I said earlier. Increasing transparency.
Yep.
So,
absolutely.
So my question is, in order to increase community, feeling. What's the phrase you use? Community support. Do you need what is it? What structure do you need? I mean, do you need an independent outside board, or do you need a committee that gives people an opportunity to bring their complaints to someone other than the police, like we're proposing? I mean, is there some structure that is needed in order to get community support, or is it really just a question of giving people access to expressing their opinions?
Well, I think what it is that you wanted somebody who's a group of people who are trusted to say to the community, this is a fair process, and they're not the cops. And that will increase trust, that there's a group that says, we've looked at this, it's fair. And, it seemed like it was a fair process. It's just, if the police say that, people aren't going to believe them. But if a group of individuals who are respected in the community say that, then the community starts to think that maybe this process is fair and an equitable process. So to answer your question, yes, I think it does increase trust, as long as there's external voices that say that the investigations or the policy review or the racial profiling claims or whatever are going to be are being done fair, and that's an external group that makes that validation.
Yeah, Jack, you've just affirmed the argument I've been making, and that's really, I've been saying that. And at this point, if people don't do it, and it's a failure. At the end of this whole thing, if you don't make that decision, it's a complete failure. So this is our chance to do the right thing. Okay.
I'm not sure that's what he said, though. At any rate, who else has their hands up? I don't see anyone. Am I missing someone? Paul, I saw your hand go up first.
Sure. Thanks for talking to us. I find this really interesting and useful.
Thanks.
I was looking at Brookline's year-end reports and racial disparity reports. And one of my questions is, the way residents and non-residents are treated, does that make a difference in looking at racial profiling? So
absolutely. When I did the report in Rhode Island, 75% of the people that were stopped were non-residents of the community that they were stopped in. This was statewide. And they were also more likely to get a citation. So there's lots of police theories that Dan could tell you about to talk about the type of police department you are, but many police departments are more likely to stop if they believe the person's an external, give them a citation, or search them if they believe that they're not from the community. Sometimes it's because they believe they may be in the community doing something bad. Sometimes officers will believe that they don't want to do that to people who pay in their salaries. So the extra non-residents aren't doing that. So there's a variety of different reasons, but you're absolutely right. When you look at the data across the country, non-residents are more likely to be stopped and more likely to be cited.
How does that fit with racial data? Meaning, does that apply whether these non-residents are black or white, or is it just black non-residents?
It's for both, but black non-residents are going to be more likely to get a citation and more likely to be searched. In every study that's been done across the country, African American and Latino males are more likely to be searched than any other group.
That data it looks the same if you look at non-residents within the town of Brookline. So say if it were field interrogations or arrests, the rate of white people and black people would be non-residents, meaning would be about the same. Whereas if you look at, and this is just the annual report and racial disparity. So given that, right? So what should we be doing in Brookline to try to address that?
Well, I think that one of the things that is being done across the country is what's called procedural justice. And when that applies to a traffic stop, it's basically treating the person, giving the person voice. And so what happens is if the police officers, and I don't know where your department is on using this technique, but if they pull someone over, they say, this is what's going to happen next. They let the person tell their story as to why they're doing it. And they also ask them if they have any questions. And if you have those three, if you have that conversation with people, their satisfaction with the stop goes way, way up. And, the officers frequently understand more about why that person's coming through the town and what they're doing. And, the citation rate tends to go down. So having that interaction at the car where the officer is not saying, do you know why I stopped you? But is saying, you were going 10 miles over the speed limit. Why were you doing that? And, do you have any questions about what the law is or what the process is? That kind of a dialogue tends to make people much more satisfied with their interaction with the police.
I see Raj's hand. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Paul, did you have something else?
But that doesn't stop that initial traffic stop.
Right.
So just looking at our traffic stops for 2020, it's 86% non-residents, 14% residents right now in 2020.
And that's
So-
all stops, Paul, or
Right.
is it?
The way I
that
understand
stop
it, it's all stops, including citations, warnings,
Mhm.
and any arrests, all stops.
That's pretty high, 84%. That's up there. Most places stop people more, but that's pretty high rate. Now, you're on the border of Boston, right? And there's surely some thoughts that people from Boston are. At one point, I did a study with Cambridge, and 80% of the people arrested who were juveniles in Cambridge were not from Cambridge. So sometimes it's the geographic. I mean, I'm out in Holliston now. If you said you were coming from Hopkinton, maybe it isn't the same thing as coming from Boston to Cambridge or Boston to Brookline. I don't know.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Raj?
Yes, so Bernard, you said a few moments ago, something to the effect of how do we gain the or the central goal of all this should be, how do we gain the confidence and support of the community? And the kinds of things that need to happen to have that actually come out is that community and interaction with the police is of the nature that people can walk away from any interaction and say, okay, that was fair. Maybe I did it wrong, maybe I didn't wrong, but I got it. I got a proper point of view. So I would say the important thing still is somewhere, somehow in any, whether it's the community, the citizens committee or whatever it's eventually called, that there needs to be an interaction and feeling that there's good faith effort on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's what
Yeah,
Jack.
Raj, one thing I would say that you may want to consider, and I think, Dan, you can correct me if you're still doing it, I know you've done it in the past, is that, complaints are a bad measure. It's a bad measure of the quality of a police department.
Yep.
People don't complain, they feel it'll be retaliation, they feel nothing's going to happen. In any police department, the number of problems are much less than the complaints they receive. And so we had just to give you an example, we had a big town hall at Northeastern after the Black Lives Matter protests, and people were citing all these things that were big problems with the Northeastern police, and there were no complaints. There was one complaint 2 years ago and no complaints in the past year, but there were problems. And so complaints aren't a good measure. So I'm going to offer you a different one, which is, a number of police departments do customer satisfaction surveys. And what that would be is some kind of a brief 2 or 3 question survey that you could use somebody's electronic email address for, or send a postcard, or however you wanted to do it. But the cheapest way is to use email and have that person rate how they were treated. And people do respond to those. Not everyone, of course, but people tend to respond. And you could do that across, the department would know the name of the officer that they interacted with, the time that they interacted with the officer, what the nature of the interaction was. And then they could be able to correlate that back when they got back the information. It's a more systematic way of collecting data about community attitudes. And it's cheaper than doing an attitude survey, which I know you guys have done in the past, and those can be very expensive, particularly these days. So
we're way ahead of you. We're doing that, or we're putting that together. We haven't done it yet.
Yeah,
we're
working on it as a SurveyMonkey survey that we'll put on social media and on the police department and town website. They're working on that.
And if officers in some agencies, officers collect the email address of people stopped or people they interact with, and then you could tie it back to a specific incident.
That's what I was going to say. You're not proposing a sort of general email satisfaction, but targeted to every time there's an interaction, you then ask the civilian, how to go. Is that?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Obviously, it's a sample of civilians. You don't have to do them all, but it would be a sample, a random sample of cases, and you ask them, and like I said, people do respond, and you have a pretty clear idea of what they're responding to.
All right. Okay. I don't see any hands raised. Are there hands raised behind my back or something?
Marty does have his hand raised.
Oh, and Elizabeth too. Actually, Elizabeth had her hand raised before, so let's hear from Elizabeth. And I think that we're running about an hour and 15 minutes into this, so let's see if we can wrap it up and get to some of the other items on the agenda. So, in other words, Marty, make it short. Just kidding, Marty. Elizabeth?
Thank you. I just want to point out to the committee that Ryan Black in the Q&A pointed out that the The task force looking into policing found that according to the town's transportation department, a lot of the traffic here is actually from the western suburbs, which gets to your point, Jack, about geography being a really critical issue in that data. And I also want to really thank you. I think this is incredibly helpful. I just wondered if you could, you've been talking a lot about the training and what works and what doesn't work, but training is many different types of training. And so I wondered if you could just clarify for me, like, what training you think doesn't work and what training you think maybe does work, because we do a lot of different training. The police do a lot of different kinds of training. Thank you.
Sure. For unconscious, it depends on what you're dealing with. For unconscious bias, there's fair and impartial policing is the name of the training that's being done across the country, and I don't know if it's been done up here, and that's been proved to be effective, at least in terms of people saying that they learned something that was helpful to them. There's the procedural justice training that I mentioned, which speaks to that was developed at Yale, and it speaks to how people get voice to interactions with the police. So those would be two, and then we're seeing some good stuff being done out of University of Cincinnati on de-escalation training, where police officers are taught, and I know that, again, they already have that, but this is a new form of that, how to de-escalate incidents. So those would be three that have been proven, have been studied and found to be effective with some officers anyway.
Yeah, I think we've done them all. Is that not right, Dan?
Yeah, what was the first one, Jack, again? I know we've done procedural justice, we've done the
one I was mentioning was Lori Friedel's fair and impartial policing one. They're doing that in New York City now and around the country.
We have been doing fair and impartial policing. We have had, we recently started sending supervisors to the training.
Okay.
To come back and, you do more stuff in-house.
Yep.
As far as the Cincinnati de-escalation, we've been going with the ICAP model from the use of force decision-making model since 2015 to 16. We put it in place and everybody's been trained multiple times in it.
And that seems to, they did a study in Louisville. Robin Engel is doing that.
I saw that. Yeah. And it showed that it reduced a lot. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, who is the next person? Oh, Marty. Okay.
You forgot to say again, keep it short. My last question really is, we talked a little about Cambridge. Where else in Massachusetts is there an independent civilian review board that has actual disciplinary authority as opposed to just policy recommendations, that kind of thing?
I don't know of any that has discipline authority.
Right.
There's a board in Springfield that I'm aware of. There's obviously the Cambridge board, but I don't know of any that have the authority to impose discipline.
In fact, Springfield has a big problem with excessive force cases, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the department's problem. Remember when I opened and said Brookline has a good police department? I would not open a meeting in Springfield by saying Springfield has a good police department. They have some good police officers, but they don't have a good police department.
So basically, the main model that we could look at that's been in existence in Massachusetts is Cambridge.
Yep.
And from what I hear,
and Boston's, as Boston has the model that allows them to look into cases and have cases brought up and review cases. They can interview witnesses, but they don't have any administrative regulation that they can set a punishment. Right. But just so you know, I mean, most of you already know this, the committee that just reported out to the mayor is speaking about having a new board put in place that is an oversight for the Boston Police Department, where it would be able to conduct investigations. Yeah. And it looks like the mayor is going to go forward with that. So I don't know, it hasn't been formed yet, but it's in their set of recommendations from Wayne Budd's commission, if you wanted to look at that.
And lastly, you mentioned Washington, D.C. I know that you were familiar with that study that I also sent you yesterday by Terrell. Is that how you pronounce it?
Bill Terrell, yeah.
Bill Terrell, looking at a bunch of agencies across the country and finding problems with basically all of them. Is Washington basically the best model that you can think of?
Yeah, Washington is probably the best model out there, but as I say that, it's, I don't know, I think the last number I saw was something like $8 million a year to have it. So, you know, it's pretty expensive way to go. They do their own investigations. They have a hired investigative staff. They have administrative staff. They have hearing staff. They have technology. Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks so much for coming.
Sure.
Yeah, Michael Keaveney.
How you doing, Mr. McDevitt? Mike Keaveney.
Hi, Mike.
Yours many years ago, you and Jack. And,
yeah.
It was a great time there at Northeastern. What I wanted to ask you is, with your understanding of civilian review boards, and you know, there was some conversation about, you know, officers having some apprehension to speak to these civilian review boards. Do you have any idea why there's apprehension?
Well, as I said, it's because most officers believe that individuals don't understand what it's like to be an officer, you know, and you know, we had an incident, just give you an example. We had an incident, and I think the officers are wrong because people can learn and understand that. We had an incident at Northeastern on Columbus Day, I think, where a young man had a gun and a police officer saw the person with a gun, did what I would say is a remarkable job of disarming the kid without drawing on him, just taking the kid was 13, taking the gun out of his pants, took him out of it. But then the officer was coming to work, so he didn't have his uniform and stuff, and he didn't have his handcuffs. So he yelled for another officer to come, and he put the young man on the ground, not kneeling on him, but face down on the ground to handcuff him. Somebody videotaped it, and it went really viral and became a huge issue. And the issue was for police officers who do that, they said that was just normal police procedure. I mean, you know, you got to hold the kid while he's there so he doesn't run away. That's what the police would say. I disagree, but that's what the police would say. But to our community at Northeastern, there was a 13-year-old kid on the ground with his cop over him, and he's screaming and calling for his mother. And, you know, so for the community, he was terrorized. So there is something to the fact that if you do this every day as a police officer, you get used to a certain kind of behavior, and that we as civilians might see that behavior as, you know, too challenging and too violent. And I think the lesson from that is not that one side's right and one side's wrong. The lesson is it's an opportunity to talk about how one might do this differently so that a young person didn't get traumatized, right? But that's where the police officers are coming from.
Right. Yeah. You know, does any of this come from like maybe a distrust of the police officers having to be interviewed by people that they are not comfortable with being interviewed by?
Sure. I think that's absolutely, that's part of it. And, you know, being in a system that they're not familiar with, right? I mean, they're familiar with IED and how they do it, and they've heard of other officers going through IED, and so that's familiar to them. This would be a new process.
And how do you feel the right approach would be to make sure that the correct people are placed on these committees, that you don't have biases on either side?
Yeah, I think it's got to be people that are respected in the community, because at the end of the day, they're going to be standing up and saying, we believe the police did this fairly. And so it has to be somebody who's not, you know, loyal to the police department and never going to see a police officer wrong, or somebody who thinks every police officer is racist. You know, it has to be somebody that the community says I believe this person has some integrity. And that would be the key, because at the end of the day, that their voice is going to be what makes the process work.
Yeah. And
Okay,
it
thank
really, it also requires that in putting the committee together, the charge is clearly clearly shows that the intent is to have a balanced committee with balanced procedures and fair procedures. So any other questions? No.
Well,
thank you, Mr. McDevitt.
thank you all very much. Thanks
Okay,
for
very, very helpful.
session.
I took notes. I hope other people have taken notes, and we should make sure that we digest what was said and make sure that the wisdom that was expressed in them is reflected in our reports and what we do for going forward. And of course, we'll excise what is wrong in what you said. Not saying that we'll take everything at face value, but
Sure, that's fine.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Marty.
Okay, it's 6:27. Devin is going to leave us soon, but I can take over if necessary. But I would like to quickly go through the reports on the status of subcommittee reports and recommendations. And if we need any votes, we can do that also. First of all, I'd like to ask our newest member, Bob Sable, whether you've been able to identify a subcommittee you'd like to work on. No, you're muted. Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I just heard you.
I think it's Marty and Michael's committee, the accountability. Is it? I can't remember the name of it now.
Yep. Okay,
Welcome.
great. Well, let's start with that committee.
All right. And we've been continuing to meet on Mondays. We won't meet this coming Monday because it's MLK Day, but we'll resume meeting the following week. I guess there are 3 issue areas we've been working on and continuing to work on. One is what's now being called the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee, which would be a group of civilians tasked with reviewing internal investigations of police complaints, reviewing policing policies on an ongoing basis, and sort of otherwise playing a role as a civilian liaison between the public and the police department. So we have a kind of working charge, and obviously you, Bernard, know this as you've been playing a role in helping write some of those documents. The second thing we've been working on is the civilian complaints policy as it exists now and making some changes to it. So there's a draft of a kind of redlined draft of the policy that's in the packet for today with certain changes that perhaps we can talk about or perhaps not. If anyone is particularly interested in that, I'd be curious to hear feedback on some of the changes recommended. And then finally, Ron specifically, who's a member of the subcommittee, has kind of convened a task force of sorts to iron out some of the details about implementing a customer satisfaction survey of sorts, as Jack kind of referenced earlier, by which civilians could describe and evaluate their encounters with the police. Those are the 3 issue areas we've been working on and will continue to be working on. We don't have any votes for today.
Okay. And by the way, with respect to these reports and other reports of subcommittees, we are trying to get around the open meeting law, legally though, by posting these documents on Google Docs so that people can make their comments to the documents. And at the same time, those comments will be available to the public. I urge people to look at the documents on various subcommittees, Google Docs pages, and make comments, edits, proposed edits, etc. And of course, whoever is controlling the document will have final say in terms of what gets put into the final form. So,
and then one last thing I'd like to add. Also included in the packet for the committee today is a draft of our subcommittee's report. which is largely at this point an evaluation of the complaints process, although there are some other items there, including items related to the civilian feedback form that Ron's been working on. And so, yeah, that's also included in the packet. I don't know where we are in terms of the full committee's report, but our subcommittee at least has a kind of working draft of recommendations and kind of the work we've been doing, and it's in the packet. So I just wanted to make reference to that.
My thinking is that the full committee's report will be basically the subcommittee reports with maybe an introductory, chapter, because the work of the committee is through the subcommittees for the most part. I mean, we have the ban on chokeholds. I mean, I guess that's a separate thing. Maybe a couple other things, but for the most part, it's the subcommittee work. Okay, civil rights, militarization, and mass events. Yes.
Bernard?
Yeah. Marty, go ahead.
I know, I'll be brief. You don't have to say it. I just want to make a brief comment, which is that I did finally glance at the material in the packet, and I just have to give credit to Michael for the work that he's doing. I mean, if you look at that draft report, it's really nothing personal, Michael Keaveney, but I'm talking about Michael Zurab. It's in keeping with what he does for minutes. It's just amazing how hard he's working and how thoughtful everything is. And I have a lot of comments on the draft report and on the complaint policy that was attached, but I'll save those for later, and hoping Michael and I can talk the next couple of days. But I just really want to give him credit for what he's doing.
Yeah, I'd like to second that and urge people to read the report, because in addition to being very well written, I used to be a lawyer, and I'm used to seeing crappy writings by lawyers. So when something is written well, I really notice, and it's not only written well, but more importantly, maybe, is that it provides a lot of good information in a form that helps you really understand, what the issues are and how we need to think about them. So, this is not going to be a love fest for Michael Zurab.
Oh, you can keep going if you want.
No, we're not going to do that.
I
really appreciate it. That's all.
I have criticisms, but I'm saving them for later.
Yeah, I have a lot of criticisms too, but I want to give you credit where credit's due.
No, thanks. I really appreciate it. I really do.
Civil rights, militarization, and mass events. So, Paul Yee.
With the holidays, we did not meet. There's a draft report that's circulated to the committee members. I hope everybody got it. Once everybody had a chance to digest that, we can meet and go over the report. And that's where we are.
Yeah, and that committee has accumulated a lot of very important information, and I think they're beginning to put it into a form that is going to be extremely important, and it's going to give us a really good understanding of some of the data issues that we're always talking about. So,
Bernard, may I just ask Paul, is there a rescheduled meeting? I know there was a mix-up on the open meeting law last week, but I want to try to join in on the profiling data stuff. Is there just keep me posted in that loop, I guess, is the question.
I haven't rescheduled anything.
Okay.
So we can all talk offline with
with
Ron and everybody else. And then
okay, keep me in that loop.
We need to have it posted. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, community outreach, youth, non-traditional roles. I see Casey Hatchett is here. So, she's been doing a lot of very important work, and I'd like to know more about it. So, Casey, go ahead.
Hi, Bernard. Hi, everyone. Unfortunately, with the holiday and then the last week with the COVID vaccine rollout, I was not able to get a meeting scheduled. There's an email in our subcommittee's email bin right now looking for dates for next week to schedule our meeting. But I think next up on our agenda, we'll be hearing from Lieutenant Pastor and Annabelle Lane about the CIT program. I'd also like to update the committee on the emergency management role the police department plays in the community. And I think it's certainly timely now looking at the COVID vaccine rollout and the role that the police department is playing in that at the town-wide level with the Emergency Operations Center. And the walk and talk survey is, we have many of the results in, and I know Caitlin Stars is on this evening, and she is doing data entry and analysis this week, and hopefully we'll have something available for our meeting. If we can meet early next week, she'll have some data available for us to look at on that front. So that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing those results.
Yeah. And by the way, what about the homelessness task force, or whatever you call it? That I don't think people know about that.
Yeah, so we did on our last
I don't
meeting.
know.
On our last meeting, we had a discussion about the homelessness issue in Brookline. I'm sorry, I did not get to update us on our last meeting because I wasn't here. It was really productive meeting. We had the officer in our department that has been primarily responsible for managing the homelessness issue, as well as Lieutenant Pastor, talking about what available services are in our state for people that are homeless in Brookline and throughout. And we have some great ideas that I'll be bringing forward to the task force that we're in the process of establishing, which will have representatives from Brookline Community Mental Health, the Health Department, the Police Department, Brookline Housing Authority, and there may be one or two other organizations. I have to consult my notes, but I did send an email out to a group looking to bring some folks together to talk about homelessness and see if we can really get the long-term work that needs to be done to address homelessness in Brookline into the hands of an agency that's, more, which it would be more appropriate for it to sit with. Certainly like what we have with our hoarding task force and other task forces in town, a holistic approach of bringing multiple agencies together, I think is the right way to go. And I was enthusiastically met with volunteers to sit on that. The Department of Public Works is the other organization as well. And so we'll be convening a meeting in the next 2 weeks to talk about the issue and move forward with the task force. And that will be certainly included in our next meeting where that stands.
As I understand, and I don't understand it well enough, you're talking about identifying resources that we currently have in the community dealing with homelessness, but in a sort of scattered way, and trying to pull that together in a coherent task force or coherent program to deal with the homelessness issue.
So unfortunately, Bernard, what we have identified is that there's no resources currently in those agencies to deal with homelessness. And so all we're enthusiastic in exploring how their agencies could and should be contributing to that issue in our community. Right now, the homelessness issue is predominantly dealt with by the police department and in conjunction with the Department of Public Works. And the health department was enthusiastic, Brookline Community Mental Health as well, and Brookline Housing Authority. And so we'll be convening a meeting before the end of this month to talk about what the current status is of homelessness in Brookline and how we can bring our resources together and find potentially a more appropriate home for the long-term solutions that are needed to address homelessness beyond the 911 calls.
When I said resources, I meant the agencies that may not be doing anything, but can be, pulled together. And I assume that another agency that deals with homelessness in the way that it can is the library. And I assume that they're involved with this too.
I had not included them, but I will, thank you for that. I will most definitely reach out to the library and see if they'd like to assign someone to work on our task force as well. That's a great idea.
An example of how, the failure to deal with the problem results in people who are homeless using the library as I don't know, a place to go to the bathroom, a place to hang out. We got to do better than that. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. And Michael actually had some suggestions on some other initiatives that have been employed in other communities to be able to provide facilities like that for homeless in the community. And so that will be shared at our meeting as well.
Good.
I think it's called the Portaloo. Is that right, Michael? I think it was a Portaloo.
Yeah, Portaloo, that's right.
Yeah, okay. It's not just for homeless, it's for like old folks like me. Important. Okay, so mental health and substance abuse. Elizabeth?
Yes, so we continue to work on our multiple issues. We've heard from the Brookline Police Department about their current existing programs, which are substantial. to work with people with mental health issues and substance abuse. We heard at our last meeting from the Mass Behavioral Health Partnership, which is the funding agency for all emergency services teams across Massachusetts, and to understand the broader perspective of what those teams have to offer. We're also working with the Boston Emergency Services team, which is the emergency services team assigned to Brookline. And there are a lot of opportunities with that team for improving our knitting together what they can offer with what Brookline Police already does. And I think that they'll be at our next meeting, which will be on the 25th of January. We also have a summary of the Middlesex County Reformation Center implementation team and the lessons learned from that, what the big differences are, and whether or not it's something that would be appropriate for, it's probably not appropriate at the level of Brookline, but Norfolk County, what would our part be in that? And what would we bring to the table? And then finally, I just want to say that the task force subcommittee on vulnerable people held a webinar with Tim Black from the Cahoots program out in Oregon last week. And it was really quite informative. So that's another, that's a linkage between the two subcommittees. So we were really pleased to be part of that presentation. I think that we're moving right along. We got a late start on our committee, so we have a little ways to go yet before we pull all our information together. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Good. And the idea here is to figure out ways in which we can provide people suffering from mental health or substance abuse crises something other than a jail cell or an emergency room chair. And, you know, both of which are kind of useless in terms of solving the long-term problems they have.
Right. It's both. Yeah, it's both diversion from jail and the criminal justice system. It's also to avoid terrible, tragic outcomes like just recently happened in Newton, and to make sure that we're getting people. I mean, the reason the police are involved is they are the 24/7 response team for a failed mental health system. And so the question is, how do we get people back into the services that they really need, not in the police services? So that's really the challenge here.
Okay. Finally, personnel structure and mission.
We have not met.
Elizabeth again.
Yes, we have not met since our last committee meeting. We are meeting tomorrow, where I'm hoping that we will be able to review the a summary of the report, and at that point we can move forward with that. So I don't really have anything else to report on that one. Great.
Any other matters that we should talk about in terms of where we go from here? I added one item to some subcommittees' work, and that is this issue of oath to the Constitution of the U.S. I don't know what committee should be handling that. I think personnel probably is the appropriate committee, and that's just a question of I think all we need to do there is raise the point and maybe communicate with the state representatives and possibly even consider some type of bylaw or propose policy or procedure change. But that does take a little research, though. So.
We can add that to our agenda.
Yeah. Okay. Marty.
Two things on that last point. It seems to me I see no reason why we could not just double negative in there. Anyway, it seems to me we could make a Brookline oath. I mean, I found out through research with Linda Goldberg that the oath for town meeting members was just something concocted by Brookline. It's not state law. It's not in a bylaw. So it seems to me we could add to the oath that officers take what you're talking about. That seems pretty simple. The other thing is I want to get back. I didn't want to do it earlier because I didn't want to keep Jack McDevitt, but I do agree with the comments that what happened in Washington was a disgrace for the Capitol Police. I'm glad to see people looking into that. And I think the chief has resigned. When you have officers taking selfies with protesters, it was just really disgraceful.
Yeah.
So that's it.
And I think that sort of illustrates that one of the problems that we have with policing in the U.S. and Dan, I don't think we have that problem here in Brookline, so don't get worked up. Is leadership. I mean, the leadership of the Capitol Police, but also the role that the president and the administration and various agencies played in terms of apparently slowing down even the FBI in terms of providing intelligence data to the appropriate people. It was the New York Police Department that was providing information on the social network or social media postings of some of these folks, and not apparently not the FBI or Homeland Security. So I mean, we have a real problem in this country that goes to the leadership, and hopefully next Wednesday, matter of fact, that leadership's going to change, and the Biden and Harris are going to have a huge task to sort of get out of this rut that we're in. But at any rate, by the way, and I think we, in addition to a Brookline oath, I think we really ought to make the point that it is, in my opinion, and without having done maybe enough research, but in my opinion, it's really an outrage that the oath that police take on a statewide basis matter of fact, is not even a police oath. It's an oath of correctional officers in the statute. But it's an outrage that it doesn't require them to take an oath to the Constitution, U.S. Constitution. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but that's my opinion. I may be wrong. Okay. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Thank you. I'm sorry, Michael, are you about to say something?
I did just want to say one thing. I mean, obviously there was huge issues with the police response. There are also police officers who've tried their best, and some police officers who literally got beat to death. I mean, at least one. So let's not forget about those people either.
Yeah, the overwhelming majority were really did an incredible job under impossible circumstances. Now, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, there were clearly some who were treasonous, and there was a big leadership issue. But it's a really complicated situation, and we should acknowledge the people who tried their best in impossible circumstances.
And not in defense of the guy who's taking selfies. I just saw one, maybe there's more. But I mean, I'm sure he thought that this was just a big happy event as opposed to an insurrection, because that was the message that he probably got from the top.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to excuse that guy, but
no, I'm not excusing. I'm just saying that who knows? Hopefully there'll be an investigation that goes deep into this deeply.
But I'd just like to point out too that I don't think there's any correlation that you can put with what happened in Washington, D.C. to the Brookline Police Department.
No, absolutely. No, I don't think anyone is. I mean, what happened in Washington, was really a federal failure for the most part. I mean, the D.C. police, did an excellent job. The National Guard, when they were allowed in, and did their job, properly. It's just, the federal police forces. I mean, it's scary that, Homeland Security to this day is not, told us, what was going on and what the future risk is. So.
Bernard, I just don't want my remarks to be misinterpreted. I would use it as a model of the contrast between the department we have and what you saw in Washington, the terrible leadership and some terrible misbehaviors by some individual officers. So I wasn't trying to cite it as an analogy. I was just disgusted about what happened there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'd like to end this meeting and go have dinner.